This channel is supported by Truefire.
Well, what is this all about then? It's the Truefire Summer Music Festival. What I'm going to tell you about, you can get 1 month of all access for just $1. The all access, you can dip in and out of every single course on Truefire, so that's a really great way to get some awesome courses down you.
Okay, so Abraham asked me a question on Instagram. Now, I think I've done a video around this idea before, but you know me, I'll do another one. Anyway, so the question was, could I kind of do a video about the NanoCortex, the HX Stomp, which I think I'd pick. Bearing in mind that HX Stomp is about my favourite device out there and has been for 5-6 years. Prior to that, I was big into the Kemper, but HX Stomp and the whole Helix kind of ecosystem I've grown to sort of love over time. Definitely a steeper learning curve. And the NanoCortex actually, I think, for me, is Neural's best product so far, because it doesn't under-deliver on promises. It's kind of already surpassed what we expected out of it. But in any case, here's a video talking about some of that stuff. So in that introduction there, so the NanoCortex sounds were actually initially started off as captures of my HX Stomp. So philosophy-wise, I think, first of all, these might be two very useful objects to have both of, because I think it's a very different sort of approach. And of all the things that can capture, I think the NanoCortex is about the tidiest, ecosystem at the moment. The app works quite nicely. The Kemper player, I think the rig manager and that sort of side of things is not super great. The app with the NanoCortex connects quite nicely. And, you know, you can just plug this. Since we don't have capture in the Helix ecosystem, it might not be a bad thing to have with it as well, right? Alternatively, something like Tone X1, but Tone X1 you can't actually capture on the thing itself. You need to use your PC. Anyway, so in terms of portability and all-in-one capturability, NanoCortex, I think, is about the best device on the market for the money. So there is that. So what I would say is the approach is super different, though. So what I like about the HX Stomp and why it feels a bit more comfortable to me is that it seems to stay slightly more alive. So once I capture like my Eric Lead preset in the NanoCortex, just something seems to me to have sort of flattened out, like response-wise. Some of the magic or some of the things that I really feel like I respond to in my playing or that I like to hear, it's kind of just a little bit of it is gone. I don't know, that's how I feel about it. Obviously the delay and reverbs in here are going to be different to what I've dialed in on the HX Stomp. So that is kind of my comfort blanket and my tones that I use all the time in here. So it would be hard to totally like beat that easily, but you can get pretty close pretty quickly. And I think that is the benefit of capture and profiling stuff, right? Is that you can get a good result pretty quickly. Beyond that, what I also like to do in the Helix world is actually kind of mix and match stuff and experiment with stuff. So, you know, this preset I'm talking about here, the Eric Lead preset, actually started off specifically trying to dial in an Eric Johnson type lead tone. And over time, it's kind of just morphed into my own thing, and I'm using stock cabs on there. You know, I'm actually using less gain than I used to. I've turned off. I used to have a top secret OD, which is the Dodd OD250. That I no longer use on most of the time. And so this is kind of the thing that I like about actually having access to everything which is in that signal chain. Rather, when you flatten it down to like your capture, it's kind of like, well, you can make a few little tweaks, but in general, what you've got there is what you've got. So that's, yeah, another thing that for the sort of matchless lead tone that I dialed in, that was just something that I did on the fly. I was like, well, what would it... I'm trying to get something that sounded, you know, a bit more like that first lead tone that came out of here. And I was like, well, okay, I could pull up a matchless channel 1 and then do that sort of stuff. So that for me, I think if you've got more time on your hands and are more interested in getting into the nitty gritty, then I think the Helix ecosystem is a really nice place to sort of start learning some of this stuff. And there's definitely a learning curve with it, but I would say that that device would be my choice. For ease of use and quickness, I think the NanoCortex wins. Giggability, let's talk about that. So the major downside of the HX Stomp for me is this power supply, whereas this one you can use 9 to 12 volt 600 milliamps, so you can actually power this like I was here off of just a normal power supply. I think that's a major win in terms of taking this thing out and gigging it. That's a good thing. You know, on one occasion in years I've forgotten this power supply, so it's not a thing that's happened often, but if it does happen, then you're kind of screwed. So have a backup, have 2 backups, whatever, because it's not the sort of power supply that you can just borrow off of someone else. That's the one downside, I think, with the HX Stomp. Now, other things in terms of giggability, I would say, so assuming that on your gig you want access to a few sounds at a time, the negative with the HX Stomp for me is that you've got access to basically 3 snapshots, which to me is 1 too few. Whereas the NanoCortex, you've actually got access to 4 kind of sounds. So you can have, on each of these buttons, there's 2, and it kind of has this toggle mode. So that, for me, I think is actually a little bit better for gigging. I think 4 presets on the actual, you know, preset snapshots, however you want to think about it, sounds on the actual face of the device is ideal. 3 is just 1 too few. So that's kind of my take on that. Actually getting access to 4 proper sounds with just 2 switches I think is really clever. But also, long hold this one, you get a tuner. Long hold this one, you get tap tempo, which is a new addition which wasn't on there when I first did this. So this is not the case with the HX Stomp. So with the HX Stomp, if you're in snapshot mode, you're in snapshot mode, so you have 3 snapshots. If you're in stomp mode, you'll have these 2 doing something, and then this one here will be your tap tempo or tuner. So I think you actually, for my money, get a slightly more versatile gigging experience with the NanoCortex. Weird as that is to sound. Now, of course, expandability is a thing, and the MIDI command center in the HX Stomp, I think, smokes anything that the Neural can do in that department. Also, you've got a send and return on here, so you can integrate it into a rig, I think, a little bit better, whereas this doesn't have a send and return, so you would just go basically put stuff after it if you were doing that. So I think that, on balance, you know, could make some people choose one or the other. You've got an expression input or a MIDI input, which gives you some element of controllability on the other stuff. I've not looked into that too much, but if you look up like the MIDI implementation chart, I'm sure you can get some great stuff. On here, you've got an expression 1 or 2, or a foot switch control for foot switch 4 and 5, which does really get you to a scenario where it's more giggable. I'd also say if you were definitely sure that you wanted to gig the thing, the HX Stomp XL might make more sense, because you've got actually 4 snapshots on that, and yeah, that I think gets you plenty to gig, as well as like a mode switch so you can go between 2 different modes. So XL might be the bet if you were definitely going to be gigging. Downsides with the NanoCortex, I would say, to me, if you edit in the app for too long, it starts to feel a little bit disconnected from a guitar experience. I would say it's a bit more of a menu experience, and sometimes doing things like, you know, changing the mix on a delay, stuff like that, I think kind of don't work too well with like virtual knobs that you have to touch, because it's kind of just hard to get them in the right place. So that for me is a little bit of a downside. The other little bit of a downside here is that actually editing anything on the face of the unit in the heat of battle, I don't think I'd be much use at it, because it's like you've got these 5 dots that indicate, you know, what you're editing, but it doesn't necessarily correlate because there's no screen or anything. It's kind of like, I don't really know what I'm editing. So I'd say you basically need to be using your phone with it to get any sense out of it, I think. And that, to me, is a little bit of a downside. You're going to have your phone with you anyway, probably, but in terms of making quick edits, it's a little bit tricky, I think. Whereas the HX Stomp, if you've got your head around how the menu and that side of stuff works, then actual knobs and stuff like that, I think, are kind of better for editing, and having a screen that tells you what you're doing does mean that by itself, this unit is a little bit more tweakable and a bit more easy to understand. Obviously, you can edit this on a phone, so that is a bit of a downside. Full MIDI input and output, and a phone's output. You've got a phone's output here. So in terms of that sort of stuff, I think, yeah, I think that about covers it. One other little thing I would mention is that the NanoCortex, you have 5 banks of 5 captures. So 25 like amp type things in here essentially. On the app you've got 256, I think. So for a gig, I think that'd be plenty, and I think you've got access to like 128 presets if you're using a MIDI controller. So I think you've got plenty there, but at the same time, when you think about what a capture is, which is just one sort of snapshot of an amp sound, that could be in some ways a little bit more limited, which I guess maybe that's part of what you would want, because it's kind of a little bit more of a streamlined experience. Whereas I think with the HX Stomp, it's kind of like you've got 100 plus amp models, so it's more likely that you'd be able to, if you're comfortable dialing this stuff in, find a sound that's going to work. But I think in general, the idea of just scrolling through a captures and finding one that worked for you is going to be a little bit of a quicker approach. Effects wise, the NanoCortex, there's not loads in there, but it's pretty good. the HX Stomp, there is loads in there. Some of it's a bit of a mixed bag, but I think you've got great delays, great reverbs, some really good mods, really good compressors, really good drives. But it's a bit more of a option paralysis type situation, whereas the NanoCortex at the moment, way more limited in scope, but you've got some really good stuff in there that sounds good, in my opinion. Anyway, so that's kind of my thoughts on it. If you're looking for a quick win, I think the NanoCortex. If you're looking for a ecosystem that you can explore and dip your toes in the water and sort of dial in your tones, I think for me the HX Stomp gets me closer to what I want to sound like, whereas the NanoCortex, I can capture this sound from here, but then it's still like, it's not quite exactly what I want. So I don't know, for me personally, HX Stomp, but the NanoCortex should not be sniffed at, and the fact that I'm comparing it to my favourite pedal, I guess shows you that I do hold it in pretty high esteem, if that's worth anything to you. Anyway, if you want these presets, jump up into the cloud for the Nano stuff. Still no marketplace for Neural DSP. It's really surprising to me that, because I thought that would be for sure something that they'd want to sort of encourage sort of more pro users to get involved, but odd. Anyway, HX Stomp, if you want my presets, Gumroad's the place to grab them. I will chuck up that mattress lead because I did think that ended up coming out really good. Helix Native is as well the sort of game changer here that means that I can just chuck this in the car, don't even have to get it out, and I can still be dialing in my same sounds. For me, the HX Stomp is an absolute no-brainer. And if anyone was out there wondering, do I think you should buy one? Probably. Cheers for stopping by.